Meghan's become a real nuisance around here. I've personally seen her drones drifting onto my property, constant, intrusive, and frankly unacceptable. Montecito officials have received multiple complaints from residents. It's clear she won't be staying much longer.
The most expensive silence in America has allegedly just been broken, and the sound replacing it is not voices, not arguments, but a mechanical whisper from the sky that neighbors say they can't escape. A whisper that, according to whispers of their own, is coming from right behind the gates of one of the most closely watched estates in Montecito. And once that rumor escaped the hedges, it didn't just spread, it detonated. Because this isn't just about neighbors being annoyed. This is about Montecito's unspoken law being violated. A law that was never written down, never signed, never enforced by police, but enforced by wealth, influence, and mutual silence. You don't watch me. I don't watch you. We all disappear together behind our hedges and billion-dollar walls. But now, that silence is allegedly cracking open like glass under pressure. And at the center of it all, according to heated local chatter and unverified accusations circulating through elite circles, is the estate linked to the Duchess of Sussex and Prince Harry, a $14 million sanctuary that was supposed to be their escape from the world, but is now being described by some neighbors as something very different. Not a retreat, not a refuge, but a surveillance zone. It starts small, almost dismissible. A distant buzzing in the air, a flicker above a garden, a shadow passing over a private pool during a family gathering. At first, people thought it was coincidence. Then it became repetition. And repetition in a place like Montecito is never ignored for long, because here, privacy is not just desired, it is sacred. Then came the name that made everything heavier, Rob Lowe, a longtime resident, someone who knows exactly how Hollywood pressure feels and still chose Montecito for its quiet. But now, according to circulating claims, even he has allegedly voiced discomfort about unexplained drone activity near private gatherings. And once that kind of claim enters the conversation, the entire tone of the town shifts, because suddenly it's not gossip anymore. It's a pattern of sightings, a pattern of complaints, a pattern of something in the sky that should not be there, lingering too long over spaces that are supposed to be untouchable. Pools, gardens, private dinners, family moments that were never meant for any audience beyond the walls. And the question that now hangs over Montecito like thick fog is not just what is happening, but why it is happening. Some insiders whisper one theory that sounds almost too explosive to say out loud, that drones may be tied to content gathering, filming, or documentation for undisclosed media projects. A theory that turns neighbors into unwilling background characters in a story they never agreed to join. But here's where the tension sharpens, because Montecito doesn't forgive accidental intrusions. Not in the air, not over private land, not over family tables. And as these claims circulate, whether proven or not, they begin to reshape something deeper than opinion. They begin to reshape trust itself. And trust, once broken in Montecito, doesn't come back quietly. Even more unsettling to residents is what they describe as the emotional shift, a feeling of being observed, of second-guessing outdoor conversations, of wondering if a quiet afternoon is really quiet at all. It's not just the drones they talk about anymore, it's the feeling those drones allegedly leave behind. And as this unease grows, so does the story. Not just as a local complaint anymore, but as a conflict slowly expanding into something bigger, heavier, and far more complicated than anyone expected when the Sussexes first arrived in 2020, carrying with them the promise of a peaceful new life away from the spotlight, because now the spotlight feels like it never left. And Montecito is beginning to ask a question it never thought it would have to ask out loud. What happens when the people who came here to escape the world are accused of bringing the world with them anyway? And that question is only getting louder. The unease in Montecito didn't fade with time, it thickened, like a rumor that refuses to die even when people stop repeating it out loud. Because once the idea of being watched enters a place built entirely on the promise of invisibility, it doesn't leave, it mutates. And suddenly every sound becomes suspicious. Every shadow feels intentional. Every distant hum in the sky turns into a question no one can comfortably answer anymore. Neighbors who once greeted each other over hedges are now allegedly speaking in lowered voices, not openly accusing, not directly confronting, but circling the same idea from different angles, like they're afraid to step too close to the center of it. The drones, the surveillance, the gatherings, the boundaries, everything becomes part of a conversation nobody wants to officially own, but nobody can ignore either. Because in Montecito, silence is never neutral. Silence is pressure building behind closed doors. And as the story escalates, so does the emotional divide. On one side, residents who insist something unusual has been happening in the airspace above private properties, pointing to repeated sightings, repeated discomfort, repeated disruptions that they claim feel too coordinated to dismiss. On the other side, defenders who argue the situation has been exaggerated, distorted, turned into a narrative that's spiraling far beyond what anyone can actually prove. But in between those two sides is where the real tension lives, in the uncertainty, in the not knowing, in the what if. Because what if it is just misunderstanding? But what if it isn't? That question alone has allegedly been enough to fracture the social calm of one of the most exclusive communities in the world. And now, even the smallest interactions are loaded with meaning. A passing glance becomes a signal. A quiet refusal becomes a statement. A security gate closing too quickly becomes a symbol of something bigger than itself. Nothing feels ordinary anymore when the narrative has turned extraordinary. Meanwhile, the Sussex estate, already a magnet for global attention, has become the gravitational center of every version of the story. Some describe it as isolated, heavily secured, almost sealed off from the community in a way that feels unusual for Montecito's traditionally open, albeit discreet, social culture. Others say that description itself is unfair, that privacy is exactly what was being sought in the first place, and that the presence of security should not be confused with hostility. But perception doesn't wait for clarity. Perception spreads faster than facts ever could, and so the town continues to fracture into interpretations rather than certainties. Every coffee shop conversation becomes a courtroom of opinion. Every local gathering turns into a silent referendum on who believes what and why. Even longtime residents, people who have seen Hollywood come and go, who have lived through waves of fame washing over the coastline, are reportedly divided in a way they haven't experienced before. Then comes the deeper fear, the one nobody says directly but everyone seems to circle around, that this is no longer just about one property or one couple. It's about precedent. Because if a place like Montecito, built on the idea of invisible boundaries and mutual respect, can no longer guarantee that sense of separation, then what does that mean for everyone else behind similar gates? And that is where the anxiety transforms into something heavier, something structural, something that feels like it could outlast the current residents, the current rumors, even the current conflict itself. At the center of it all remains a question that grows sharper with every retelling of the story. Are these incidents the result of intentional actions, misunderstood technology, or something far more ordinary being pulled into an extraordinary narrative because of who is involved? No version of the answer feels simple anymore. Every explanation creates new contradictions. Every denial fuels more suspicion. Every rumor creates its own shadow. And yet the most unsettling part of the entire situation is not what is known, but what remains unconfirmed. The gaps in the story. The empty spaces between accusations and evidence. The silence from key voices that, depending on who you ask, either suggest control or avoidance or simply exhaustion from being pulled into a storm that has grown far beyond a neighborhood dispute. As 2026 unfolds, Montecito remains suspended in that uneasy middle ground where nothing is officially resolved, but nothing feels the same either. The hedges are still tall, the gates are still closed, the ocean still crashes against the shore like it always has, but beneath that surface, something has shifted permanently. Because once a place built on privacy starts questioning its own privacy, it never quite returns to what it was before. And as the drones allegedly continue to appear in fragments of conversation, in scattered reports, in half-finished stories told behind closed doors, one thing becomes clear across the entire valley. This story is not settling. It is still moving. And nobody in Montecito seems entirely sure where it's going to land next.